The only good goblin is a dead goblin. Do you want to see some goblins getting killed? Well, good news, you're going to see a lot of that in the brand new anime series, Goblin Slayer, a series which completely lives up to its title. It's a real simple dark fantasy show all about a knight who specializes in fucking up goblins in super violent ways. The entire series itself almost seems to be like a very dark version of a Japanese RPG video game. In fact, it also gives me a lot of the vibes from the Berserk anime and manga series as well. Although maybe not as intense, it still has some pretty frightening imagery. This is basically Diet Berserk. What I will say is that the very first episode of this series was an absolute bloodbath and a straight introduction to the two main characters of the series who don't even really have names aside from the fact that they have titles. The two main characters are of course going to be the Goblin Slayer himself, who is just that, a Goblin Slayer, a really badass dude covered head to toe in armor who has all sorts of really great weapons and strategies to take down these little green goblins. Without a shadow of a doubt, Goblin Slayer is the best thing about this episode. He's a really cool looking character. I love his design. It's easily the most distinctive thing about the entire show, and I just love characters who wear masks where you can't actually see their face or read their emotions. It's a great way into sort of tricking us into thinking that they're way more complex than they actually are, but again, I just love the look of this character. He's kind of like a medieval Boba Fett. And then there's the Priestess, who looks like she's going to be the fan-servicey female character of the show. She doesn't have a name, her name is Priestess, and she's basically really good at healing people. She wants to be an adventurer. She has the magical ability to communicate with nature in order to use magic and heal people, and it's really not all that effective, and that's because in the very first episode we get to see her going on her very first adventure with a group of super confident rookies. These three characters who are getting ready to go into a cave and kill all these goblins and save this village and all of these girls who have been kidnapped. Basically, they're hot-blooded young heroes, and they're building up the fact that they have extreme confidence and everything's going to be okay. Until they actually go into the cave and they all get one by one absolutely shredded by these goblins, in a scene which was honestly kind of shocking. It was the scene that finally started to remind me of, oh yeah, this is a dark fantasy series, and honestly I didn't think that it was going to get that way. I thought that this was just going to be a standard fantasy show about watching some dude fight against some monsters, but no, suddenly things get crazy when characters are getting stabbed in the stomach, completely cut up into pieces, or straight up just being raped. The scene is shocking, but I find myself not really caring about these characters because we were just introduced to them, they have no names, and outside of their appearances, we know nothing about them. We just know that they're incredibly inexperienced, and that definitely shows off when they go inside of this cave, where the goblins just absolutely tear them to pieces. Watching these characters full of confidence going into this cave and getting slaughtered is honestly one of the most shocking things about this episode right here. In fact, they do a great job of actually showing how inexperienced they really are, whether it being overconfident in their abilities or relying on the power of friendship, which looks like it's definitely not going to work in this show, or whether it be something as simple as using a weapon which is way too big to swing around in a small cave. This one male character gets absolutely destroyed by this group of goblins because his sword is way too long. Whenever he tries to swing it, it just bangs into the ceiling, and then all of a sudden these freaking goblins just pounce on him like a bunch of rabid Pikmin. Mage Girl looked like she had the most potential, but it's only a matter of time before she ends up getting stabbed in the stomach and ends up being completely useless for the duration of the episode. Basically, Priestess is having a very bad first day. Luckily, she is saved by the Goblin Slayer himself, who just sort of appears out of nowhere with a torch, starts burning the faces off of goblins, stabbing them left and right, and coming up with all sorts of crazy strategies in order to make it out of this situation. Although he's not leaving this cave until all of these little goblin bastards are dead, and he's actually joined by the Priestess, who manages to help him out with her magic, lighting up the cave, blinding the goblins, allowing him to set up traps, and basically just run a damn train right through their damn home and kill all of them. It's pretty satisfying to see, and that combined with the super hardcore metal music that's playing during these scenes actually does make it kind of entertaining, but then we have this big scene at the end of the episode where we get to see that he basically kills all the goblins, and the only ones that are left are a couple of children. He decides to go all Anakin Skywalker on all of them by completely bashing their brains in with a giant blunt club. It's really freaking disturbing, to say the least, that this episode was filled with this much bloodshed, rape, and child murder. It's pretty fucked up, and even with all of that, by the end of the episode, the priestess seems pretty happy to join the Goblin Slayer on his adventures to, well, slay goblins. It looks like that's what the entire series is going to be about. So, is this one worth your time? Let's find out in the rundown on the very first episode of Goblin Slayer, an episode which was okay in my opinion. This is a show that I was looking forward to, as frankly just the overall imagery of all of it to me just looked fucking awesome, and I really like a lot of action, so I was hoping that would be good. Although I have to admit I was slightly disappointed by this episode, not by the stock characters or the overuse of violence, but for the fact that the production value on this show is just okay. There really wasn't a single scene that completely wowed me with its action, its execution, or even the character design, which for the most part is pretty bland. This is pretty much your typical fantasy setting. You could insert it into Fairy Tail or the Seven Deadly Sins and it looked like it would actually be in the same exact universe. And the same goes for the character designs themselves. They just kind of look okay, aside from Goblin Slayer himself, who just reeks of awesomeness. I can't wait to learn a little bit more about this guy, why he has such a vendetta against goblins in the first place. I don't expect anything really that deep from the series, to be perfectly honest. If anything, this could be equated to popcorn entertainment. The type of show that you turn your brain off and just enjoy it for what it is, which is watching a badass knight fight against fantasy monsters. And in that regard, it actually does a pretty good job, but so far it's not the most impressive first episode that I've ever seen. There is some imagery in the episode that I do think is really good, but a lot of it is just kind of meh. There needs to be a little more impact behind a lot of the things, and I'd like for the show to get a little speedier with its animation. Otherwise, though, this was a first episode, so who knows, the series could change a lot. But from my experience, when it comes to the first episode of an anime series, you really gotta wow your viewers. And so far, this was just kind of an okay first episode. That being said, I am interested to see where it's going to be going, and I would like to see what Goblin Slayer is going to give us in the dark fantasy genre. As a big fan of Berserk, I'd like to see how this one is going to try and differentiate itself, aside from being something of a lighter copy of that series. Not exactly the same thing, but a lot of those elements really carry over in this show right here, and I've read so much Berserk at this point that I felt kind of desensitized while watching some of this shit, which honestly kind of creeped even my own self out. What I will say is, Goblin Slayer might be the show you're looking for this season, it might not. I really do believe the first episode is going to completely determine if you're going to like this show or not, so check it out. I'm giving the very first episode a 3 out of 5, just a fun, average first episode. Nothing too groundbreaking here, some really shocking imagery, and the beginning of what is probably going to be a very ridiculous, over-the-top, and bloody adventure. But I really want to hear from you guys. Did any of you watch the very first episode of Goblin Slayer? Is this your introduction to the series? Do you read the manga version? I myself have never even heard of the franchise until a couple of months ago, and I haven't looked at the manga. Maybe I'll check it out after watching the very first season of this show. But again, I want to hear from you guys. Tell me what you thought about this episode. Give me your honest thoughts and what you hope to see from the future of Goblin Slayer. Thank you guys for watching this review. Make sure to check out the channel for tons of other anime reviews and other cool videos. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay down there, baby.